Second day, so thank you for being here today again. Please take your seats if you haven't yet. Okay, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to open the second day of these study days on space organized here at the NSDS Hub with the cooperation or the collaboration of ACT staff. So first, I will be very short, so I'd like to thank the organizers of this event. So that would be mainly the hub themselves and their staff. They were key for this engagement with the partners, but also on the NATO side, organizing all the bits and bytes to have you gather here today with us. I would like to thank you as participants and panelists. Without your participation to this event, we would do something that would be hollow. So you bring a lot to this event, and also, so I would like to thank my city staff because I'm living with them every day, and I saw that they were working really hard to make this happen. So thank you for that very much. So briefly on a partnership for NATO, people who know me, they know that I think this is very important. Beyond the political aspects of partnership, to me, I see the future of NATO maybe in different ways than what we're allowed to engage, I would say. We understand that in the future the security environment will be global. We understand that NATO is not only about territorial integrity. It's more than that. It's about leading security on the global stage, and we have to start thinking that NATO is not an island. I would say, as long as we are safe within our borders, we'll be good to go. This is not true. We know that. So we have described the future security environment as being persistent, simultaneous, and boundless. So this is the world in which we will live in the future as a security alliance. And a lot of indications show that. Space is one of them, obviously. If you think space, you don't think territorial borders anymore. So that's part of it. So the more we will do today and in the future to engage the partners outside NATO, the better we'll be off into our role as leading organization for peace and security. So that's one consideration that I wanted to share with you today. And then last but not least, space is a specific subject. So I came here just to make sure that you make of me an expert on space in one day or two. That's obviously irony. My point is that I'm not an expert at all. I probably know way less than anybody here in this room. But I believe that engaging partners on specific subjects is quite important because then you get some good value of it. Speaking about partnership and just speaking about it, I had some comments from partner nations. I have to say, in the last 2 years that we work on partnership, they say, yeah, but if you just repeat the same thing and there are no actions behind it, there is no true engagement, in-depth analysis, and so on. Doesn't really help. Why do we have a desk here just to say that partnership is important? Okay, we know it's important, so what do we do about it? And I think that this kind of initiatives, especially if we go in depth on the analysis of specific subject, where we can invite experts from different nations, and we can make them meet our NATO experts, I think it has a better value. We have changed a little bit the focus in ACT Norfolk on strategic foresight. That's just an example. Moving away from those big global study on this is how we see the world and this is what we have to do, but you see, without necessarily going in the details of each of the specific areas that we're analyzing. So nowadays ACT is focusing not only on specific subjects and go more in depth on what does that mean, and also on the regional aspects of it. So that falls really good into what we're doing today, yesterday and today, with this initiative. So thank you all again for your participation, and we'll sit back there and absorb everything I will hear, and hopefully become an expert. Thank you.
Thank you, General, for your remarks. It's something which gives all of us the perspective in which these activities are conducted, and the final scope, which is, of course, not only the pleasure of meeting interesting people or exchanging views, but identifying possible future developments which can be of benefit for everybody. So yesterday we had a very interesting day. We discussed, first of all, the relevance of space for human security and the need for cooperation, which is really a general approach to the issue. We devoted the morning at this subject, and the discussion was very lively and very productive. I think that all of you have taken good notes of what has been said. The second panel, which we had in the afternoon, was related more on the specific for the countries of the MENA region, and we discussed a lot about how to cooperate, what type of cooperation existed already, what can we do more, because it is so evident that space is an environment where only the big countries can think of being alone, and when they think so, they are wrong, because even the big countries need to work together. For smaller countries like the European countries, the MENA countries, cooperation is an absolute must, and we have to find ways to overcome differences of thinking, to overcome prejudice, and again, this awareness is the basic to have some productive development. Today, we have three distinguished panelists, and the title of the third panel is the Geostrategic Competition, Medium to Long-Term Outlook. The fact that we have a competition in our times is a triviality, but I believe that we should be extremely careful in devising the possible developments, because apart from the bilateral, multilateral relationship, the environment is posing very strange and unexpected challenges, such as the pandemic, such as the climate change, which today, every day, brings us news of some disaster somewhere. Yesterday, we had some disaster in the south of Italy, in Sicily. In a few hours, they had the rain they get usually in 6 months, and this is quite unusual and not very positive, I would say. So these new challenges change some of the basic of the equation of the strategic competition. And to discuss this, we have three interesting panelists. The first one I have on my list is Mrs. Rania Tukebri. Is that right, the pronunciation? Almost. I'm sorry, but I'm not very familiar with that. Mrs. Tukebri is an aerospace engineer from Tunisia. She's working for the ESA projects in Bremen, in Germany, since 2016. So she has left her country some years ago. in different conditions, I suppose. She has a space engineering diploma in instrumentation and electronics from INSAT in Tunisia, and a master's in the embedded system from UPJV in France. She's also experienced in cryptography, so we should try to interpret what she says. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I don't know if it's working. Okay, so just give you slightly. Okay. You hear me now? Great. First of all, thank you for the introduction. Maybe I can keep up introducing myself a little bit and why I'm here. So true, I'm a space engineer. I basically builder of satellites and telescopes and spacecrafts, but I'm also expert on cryptography. What I do is I do work on the hardware side and software side. The hardware side means I try to build, or I build crypto units. And I try also to work on the different algorithms and methods for encryption, decryption data from the satellites and ground station, and also on the cybersecurity methods, the software and hardware sides, also the new technology coming by. But why I'm here, I'm also regional coordinator for Africa in Space Generation Advisory Council in support of UNUSA. What we do is that we support UNUSA. We try to provide recommendations either to United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs or African Union Commission or the different regional entities in Africa. We provide recommendations. We try to support the capacity building programs. We try to, let's say, even raise awareness about space and try to talk about space and building the network of space between academia, universities, agencies, to create agencies, and also to be sure that our voices are heard in either on agencies level or on universities level as well. So this is a small introduction. And now I'll just talk about the main topic. So, okay, so here, when I just saw the title of the panel, I was extremely glad that we are talking about the projection of the next years. So here, taking in consideration all the challenges we have and all what we have done so far, I'd like just first of all to say that, so okay, this is for MENA region, but I'm more interested to work on the African region. I will tell you why. Because first of all, this is a raw market. These are people that are full of potential and we can invest a lot in them. And the second reason, because I'm African, I'm Tunisian. So here we tried overall to study the situation, make an analysis based on the SWOT analysis, for example, the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And over here, I want to say that we cannot really talk about Africa as a whole region, as a whole. We need to understand that there are three categories of countries in the region, also in North Africa. So we have the countries that have done a long path so far, like South Africa, Egypt as well. We have other countries that started becoming introduced to space, like Morocco, Algeria as well a little bit. But we have also countries that are still consumers of space that didn't really made a real national program, or they don't have space agency. They still don't have really lots of capabilities in space. And here we talk about the sub-Saharan, lots of sub-Saharan countries, and also Tunisia, which is also one case, that interesting one. So true, we've made our first step. We are going in a very good direction, but we are still kind of consumers of space. And by taking a look on these SWOT analysis, we try to understand also the weakness points and the strength points we have. I may start with the strength points we have. So we have a very good advanced Earth technology on stage, which means we have very good human and technical capabilities compared to other countries. In terms of electronics, for example, mechanical, we have very good companies that have made a good path, and they have made partnerships with the other in global scale with different countries that we can use. We have also human resources, but this is also a strength and a weakness point at the same time. So we continue with the strength points. We have also very good strategic partnerships made so far based on trust, because that's just proven that we are able to make more contracts in space field, because we have done this for different other areas. We can produce this for space, and we have very good relations with the space leaders, with the leaders in the world, in Europe, in United States, and also Russia, China. So we have very good relation overall, globally. So now maybe let's move a little bit to the weaknesses that are much more. So I'll come back to the point of the human resources that are quite interesting, but we have also to consider the brain drain. So these are people that, I'm the case, that I started having some expertise. I'm still not yet a senior, so to talk about really space or really build a national program. But here I'm using my knowledge to build satellites, but not inside the region, outside the region. So this is not helping. This is gonna make things stopped or blocked, let's say, because if you have human resources that are not there, so what's the need of forming them, or what's the need of educating them if they will not make a return at the end? So the second thing is that the educational programs are kind of in space absent. I was very surprised to see that only few universities in Africa, maybe Middle East, they have a little bit better, but in Africa, basically there is no real ministerial programs, official programs about space and security. So maybe security is a bit better because it's a topic that has been mentioned like several years ago, but space is quite new. So people that would like to make a space career will have to study abroad. And that's also a second problem. And here also we see that we all know that it's not only the role of the government or the ministry, so it's also the role of the entire society to make this happen. And here, even the society is not even aware of the importance of space capabilities. And this is also a threat. So in other words, in the next years, we will keep having the same problem if we will not take really real actions. So if we still don't have real national programs or national educational programs, we will still have the same problem. If we don't have also enough support from the government, from global support, financially speaking, we won't be able to do anything as well. And also in terms of infrastructure and in terms of collaborations and international collaborations, if you are not really willing to collaborate, there is basically nothing will happen. So talking about the medium and long-term outcomes, let's say. So here, what is happening here is maybe it started being in place. I think you know that we will have the African Space Agency very soon, I hope. And by here, there has been a kind of a plan established so far. It was a short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan, and it started taking place, but I hope that it will respect the timeline designed. So the first short-term outcome is building up the strategical plans for infrastructure building, for human resources building, and for strategic collaborations building. So this is the first thing. So we first need to understand the overall of what we need to do, and this should be based on the user needs. And the user needs are quite specific in the African region. That is very different from the Middle East. So the African region has specific huge problems in terms of disaster management, in terms of food access and water access. And that's a problem for making the socioeconomic development very hard. And we are trying to really use the space technology in order to improve this problem. So by moving to the medium term is that once, if we have already the plan ready, so we can move on to the establishment, the approval, and the implementation of this program, which is already a big step. I hope that we can make it very well. But because here we do need the approval of the whole African countries, we do need the people aware of the importance of this step, and we do need to start having at least some base to build the next generation for the human capital or also for the technological capital. And then, so this is basically the medium term. So if you are not really able to make this happen, if you are still on the first level without really moving up, we won't be able to make anything at the end. So by here, I'd like just to mention that we have 4 main areas in African and maybe Middle East as well. So we have the Earth observation satellites, we have the SATCOM, satellites communication, basically communication technology, let's say. We have the science and astronomy, and we have navigation and position. And so we have these three categories that should be used for the different issues we have that I mentioned. There are, of course, much more linked to the security of the country. So the first concern is always the stability. So we need the security in the region. We need the access to food, water. We need to improve the life quality of people first. We need to understand what they need on that concern, and we need also to educate them for the future. So, and the long term is basically the same. So what will happen is that, of course, at the end, it will be very nice competition between the countries who will be able to build the constellation, who will be able to send the first astronaut, who will be able to take the place in that raw market, because that's quite important. So if you're able really to produce certain subsystems or systems that are kind of generic for the satellites, for example, you will be able to take take over the whole region. So, and these countries, I think there has been some countries that started doing this, and Morocco is among them, and also Ghana, also Nigeria. So I think that you should really take a look at that, because that's also quite important to know. It's not only North Africa that is really taken part on that market, but also others. And then I repeat as well, so the long term, if we have already started making the first steps, we will be having a stable a financial base to build the next project, because here we may even need to talk about space exploration that is going to have a real impact in Africa. And here we talk about the lunar mining or asteroid mining that is going to help a lot. And many countries started already investing in this on this concern. So by here, so I think that the human capabilities should be already local. In other words, we should have local projects that are designed and have a real outcome from Africans to Africans, and of course take in consideration the global partnership that is quite very important, because that's gonna be like a puzzle. So each one of us can take a piece. We can just build up at the end a certain technology or service. And then a long-term thing I also consider quite important to mention is we need also to think well that Africa, we can invest well in African region in terms of downlinking, in terms of downstream, sorry. So here we talk about not only products, so satellites and so on that can be useful, but also the services that we can take from the satellites. And Africa is going in that direction. So I believe in a certain number of years, 10 years, we will have a mature market on that side, on the services, because I could see from now that many startups already started talking about how to use the raw data coming from satellites offered either by Copernicus satellites or by other satellites, make them into real useful application satellites for certain services. There is still a lot to study. There is still a lot to analyze. I just mentioned a couple of points. It's impressive how to see that we have 60% of the region that is not exploited, which are representing youth. So these 60% can be already the future. So we can really make a real investment on that side, and we can also try to build the platform and also the stable financial support that should be taken seriously from the North African, Middle East countries.
Thank you for your remarks. The image you are giving us is made of light and dark, and of course, we need a specific effort in order to remedy where remedies are needed. And let me take one of your arguments: the need for more investment in education, because without education of the young generations, we will not have the manpower required to face the challenges which this new environment requires. So thank you. And now I give the floor to Mrs. Malak Trabelsi-Loeb. Mrs. Trabelsi-Loeb is an entrepreneur, a futurist, I read here, strategist, and senior legal associate specializing in international business law and international space law. I think this is a very interesting subject because we sometimes feel the need to regulate what's going on in the space. And so far, the regulations are, in my view, my personal view, not enough. There's too much space for, I would say, strange initiatives which should be, in a way, some way regulated. So I think that you are in the heart of this specific subject. She is a lecturer in international relations and diplomacy, a writer and public speaker. So now you have to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think you can hear me, yeah? Yeah, it's working. Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. Actually, you mentioned the need to regulate and the need to fill the gaps in the space law. That's what I do most of my time when I public speak, is the need to fill those gaps, especially with the newcomers from the private sectors. For the future, what can happen with all these constellations there and the problem of space debris and so on that they are not right now taken care of. So I highlight the private actors' role into filling the gap within their social responsibilities, which we use to the social responsibilities on Earth. Now we try to emphasize that on in outer space. So I would like to share with you the small presentation that I've done. Actually, if it's a little bit too technical, please, I will be happy to elaborate on some of the points. So here, my presentation will be focused on the need of space and emphasize on the international overview from theory to practice and what is really we are witnessing today with the geopolitical rivalry between two poles of nations and how that it's affecting the new space race and what are the opportunities and challenges. And I will conclude with some recommendation also. Should I? Yes. So this has been said. Yeah. So I need to, I'm the one who need to take care of changing the slides. Yeah. Thank you. So why the need for space? Of course, I'm sure yesterday I wasn't, unfortunately, I wasn't here to follow the presentations from my colleagues about why we need space and what space can do for the socio-economic development in the area, in the region, and everywhere in the world. Actually, we need space for social development, for economic growth, security and defense, sustainable development goals, achievements, and disaster management. And actually, what we witnessed with the COVID-19 situation, states' reliance upon space-based capabilities during the pandemic demonstrated the need for space not only to manage the pandemic, but also space-based capabilities ensure the continuity of the state's functions, security, justice, public order, and public services in general. These are the main state's function when, government or authorities, what they need to do to continue their function. So when we talk about, for example, the UAE, my experience during this COVID-19 situation, the UAE already invested on its digital infrastructure, and access to justice wasn't a problem because everything all in this like in one night, and next day we took few days that we started having courts functioning and hearings, and the public service did not stop. Also, if we needed to access to any other public service, everything was online and we did not have a problem. That's why the UAE could manage very quick, comparing to other countries, the transition from the critical situation into a management and surveillance for the COVID-19 issue. So the next thing is I would like to, the next point I would like to speak about is when we talk about geopolitical situation in the MENA region. Actually, we cannot extract it from the global situation related to the issues that is going on between two poles, that they are having a big competition, whether it is it's driven by the Chinese-American rivalry and the global techno-political sphere of influence, because now the technology has big sphere of influence, and a new paradigm has emerged. And this one was emerging even before COVID-19, but it became even more prominent after the pandemic and during the pandemic time, which we're not already really out of it. So the space domain is one of the most critical domains to protect the national interest, as well as the global interest. Actually, before we did not speak so much in academia about global interest for one reason. We did not live the pandemic, which was an issue that all the international community stakeholder needed to interfere and work together to mitigate the risk of this pandemic. And also the national interest is used, the space domain is very important for the national interest. And here I, from my like research and academic background, I go now to shed some lights about my experience in practicing and helping and assisting clients that they are, for example, into technology transfer or due diligence. If there is an investor wanted to invest in a company or in technology, and I'm talking worldwide because I practice globally. So I do the due diligence, and one part of the due diligence which I will speak about is the laws that they are hindering this investments, the foreign direct investor or the investor, to enter to that typical or particular ecosystem because of the legal barriers. So why I'm talking about that again, it's because it's very important to know the overall paradigm and the overall situation in order to see what we can do for Africa. For example, my colleague Rania, she spoke about the main issues in Africa, and which I follow, and I lived it, and I continue to live it through my work with a lot of stakeholders. So we need to know what is going on and how the political, the international relations and the political situation on the international level is progressing. So here we have great power competition. So the great power competition, it is the US-China trade conflict is a political instrument bound by bound with the new world order development. This is very important because actually there is a competition. China, we know very well that getting its strategic work in Africa, which is very important to highlight that, and the way to know if, and here I am talking unbiased, and it's a point of view of like a researcher or academics. So the problem with the Chinese practices in terms of the way they are entering doing business in Africa is the unsustainable manners or the unsustainable way that China is doing. So the problem is, and we already spoke yesterday in small talk about it. When China invests into, for example, big factories or into mining, China will only take care of that the roads for that moment and doesn't look at the long-term thing. And thank you for the example you gave. It's really right on point. So the other issue that we are witnessing also is the formation of two poles, which is we have the US and allies pole, and at one side, and at the opposite side, we have China and its strategic partners. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, the world has witnessed an increased protectionist measures. So the US-China relations continue to impact the global scenes. We have economic competition and trade war, technological rivalry and counter capabilities endeavors. We have military race and security challenges, and we have another issue, which is ideological influence. So the Chino-American competition created what US President Joe Biden called extreme competition. So here I will highlight is what I witness in practice when I have investors or other companies. They want to have investments, or they want to move or open a branch in another jurisdiction, and especially when it has like a close proximity to United States. So there is, first of all, here we have the export control, and this one is applicable for all space activities and other with the dual use. Then later on, I will speak with the other point that I just mentioned before. So the protectionism has been increasing, especially after the various legislative reforms taken place since the last few years in the United States. Through exports control, so the latter were designed through legislations, licensing, and regulations to control the technology, goods, and services with a dual use, military and civilian use exports. As per Rothenberg and Italy, they wrote about it since 2011, because this one is not new phenomena, but the issue is it's increasing more and more, and this is a problem for the space industry, for the space sector, and for the proliferation of space activities in other countries other than these poles, for example, in Africa or the Middle East. So the academics claim that the exports control, regulation influence business environment and have a critical effect on trade, innovation, industry, competitiveness, and investment flow. So here, when we talk about foreign investment control, foreign direct investment, or an investor, when I say investor, is also a person or an entity wants to open a company in another country and invest into that. So we have countries have been increasing their protective measures to protect their national interest from the Chinese access to critical sectors, infrastructure, and technologies. Before, it was only related to the export control at that level, but now it is more for that. With the United States laws, now even real property in proximity to some critical infrastructure is not allowed to invest if you are not a US citizen or from the allies. And really, with this is directed to the Chinese rivalry, because the Chinese also, what they do, they are using layered investments, and this is the problem with the SPAC investment, the special purpose acquisitions, and it's a new trend that it's done in the space industry. So actually, with the SPACs, the due diligence is very, very important, because it's layered investments. You never know who's behind really the real investments, or who has control of that investment. And of course, when we speak about investments, there is a control. When you are an investor with specific shareholder, you could have control, and you can access the data, and you could access the technology that the country doesn't want to be leaked or exported, or so on. So with so here, the other one is in 2018, U.S. Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, which is called FIRMA. It's very, very important act and well known. And very important for people in the technology sector, that they are not informed about it, that they are, or even scientists, that they're not informed about the national interest prerogatives, that they need to be careful before they engage into any positions in that. So this FIRMA, implemented on February 13th, 2020, came into force to reform the national security reviews conducted by the Committee of Foreign Investment in the US, which is called CFIUS. So the US measures rippled around the other jurisdictions and increased during the health crisis. Actually, it started in the US, of course, always, and it goes and triples. Here we have other measures taken in the European Union, in the member states, and we have the same also even in Japan and going so on as a ripple effect. And imagine in this ripple effect and this hindrance of investments, because maybe there is only a Chinese company that it's not even related to the Chinese authorities, that they are jeopardized for that. And here there's the legal practitioner who's speaking for having justice at the end of the day, because if there is no intention of accessing these technologies for the authority, so the businessman or the company has the right to have to invest and to have the freedom for the business freedom or act to have to do business. And here we know very well is one of the major constitutions in the world. Freedom to do business is a human right. So when there is just this foreigner, let's say, because you are Chinese or you have your main office is incorporated in China or so on, there's another problem, which is your health already liable before even you come in, or you health, you cannot enter the ecosystem because of that. And rippling from United States to everywhere else, it's a little bit concerning, because at the end of the day, we see how can the international community sit together and find out how we can protect the rights of these investors. We have, of course, treaties and we have arbitration courts and even arbitration courts in space industry. It's still, we did not have arbitration courts specialized in to settle these ones, but there are covering arbitration courts covering space issues involving investors into the space sector. So like I said, the protectionism on the rise. So we have the European Union has equally adopted in March 2019 new regulation, which is the number is 452 2019, which implemented a screening framework to put under the member states' scrutiny the inward FDI, foreign direct investments, from the non-EU member states that may affect public order or security. And here always when we say may, it's a problem, and there is always a room for like how it's going to be implemented later on, and how the member state will be making this scrutiny. So in response to the crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, the European Commission also has issued on 25th March a set of guidelines to protect critical EU assets and technology in current crisis. And when we say assets and technology, of course, space is involved, because it's one of the most important sectors, enabler, and also is playground for defense and security. So here I will quote the EU Commission President, and based on that, we had the guideline. I mean, not based on that, but after her talk, the guidelines were presented. So she said, if we want Europe to emerge from this crisis as strong as we entered it, then we must take precautionary measures now. As in any crisis, when our industrial and corporate assets can be under stress, we need to protect our security and economic sovereignty. We have the tools to deal with this situation under European and national laws, and I want to urge member states to make full use of them. The EU is and will remain an open market for foreign direct investment, but this openness is not unconditional. So this is very, very strong quote she said, as the aim of the guidelines is to safeguard the EU critical assets and companies in sensitive and strategic sectors in a time of economic vulnerability and public health crisis. Commercial space activities within the Union would be among the activities to undergo restrictive measures due to the strategic use of space. So again, there is a case study that it's case studies that we see when it comes, we encounter when it comes to national security issues and the rise of protectionism measures is Huawei. That company keeps on being under scrutiny in all of the jurisdictions because of its proximity or because it's born in China. Now, the thing is to prove, are they really up to taking data and accessing sensitive information and all this? It needs to be investigated, and this is very important to be investigated in order not to hold any company, like I said, liable for its nationality or the place they were incorporated at. So the other one, when it comes to space companies, companies turn away the foreign investment and the business opportunity and possibilities of scaling up. And this is based on a report of Bryce Space and Technologies Report 2020, and they highlighted this issue. Not so many studies so far that they are directed toward the investments into space activities, and it should, because now the public sector needs to be supported by the private investments and not to be only like waiting for the public funding. This is the way how we can move forward and have prosperous space activities and space sector, so self-sufficient, supported with let's say all kind of and I will hopefully in a minute discuss the space ecosystem to see what we have exactly. Sorry, so I will be going quickly. So there is this company that it is LEO's satellite constellations data storage startup called Cloud Constellation turned down an investment of 100 million US dollars from the Hong Kong-based corporation HCH Group for the same reason. So without going into details here, the thing is like for Africa, I will touch about Africa is the land of opportunities for the rivals, but Africa needs space. So thank you so much for coming to Africa to bring your investments and be there. But at the end of the day, invest in space also because it's needed. So here, to face the increased trade war and expansion challenges, China, like I mentioned before, turned to Africa. And the new narrative of Africa as a land of opportunity has emerged in the international community. So the European Commission has also shown its geopolitical ambition in Africa. There is not long ago three commissioners, three high-level from the European Commission, they went to Addis Ababa, and after that they released a report. Is called Toward a Comprehensive Strategy with Africa, and they want to focus on green transition and energy access, digital transformation, sustainable growth and jobs, peace, security and governance, migration and mobility. Very, very important. And I think here how we can balance the power that China is having there is European Union and United States enter and also build the country and bring their, let's say, acquis communautaire from the EU tradition is justice, human rights and everything. So just here, so opportunities and challenges. So the new space, we have a lot of opportunities in new space. We have newcomers. We have new countries that they are there. The innovative know-how and industrial approaches, new investment schemes and funding mechanisms, disruptive market solution and new industry verticals, new markets for new space applications, and the increase in number of states with national space programs. These are the opportunities that we have. We have today off-the-shelf technologies that can be taken and used by small startups and even by countries in order to enter into the space ecosystem. So the main things with the space, new space, to emphasize on the new opportunities is we have disruptive wave of privatization, commercialization and globalization, the progressive space sector civilianization, sorry about my accent, the internationalization and commoditization induced the emergence of new trends fallen under the new space. I will not go through that all, but this is the way how space economy perimeters, so it touches every single other sectors we have, every sector. So we have the upstream, the downstream, and we have space-derived activities in other space sectors. And here's this perimeters that change from one report to another and from one OECD make it this way, and the Space Foundations in another report in another way. So here, sorry about all this. This is 1 year work in space economy in research, and this is, I've done it. A lot of research, a lot of studies, and a lot of work into understanding the ecosystem, the new space ecosystem. So here, made it this way. So we have everyone there. And what is very, very important is the non-space sector reliance upon the space, the new space ecosystem. So an ecosystem is just like any other living ecosystem. You have energy, you have actors, you have new threats, you have old threats, and here, so for example, when I talk about spacefaring nations, they are the old ones. We have new nations, we have established players and new actors. And we have also here the regulatory bodies, the National Policy, Space and Defense Agency, and we have the trends of the market. So new emerging market, new products, services, and I don't see the rest. I will be happy to easier to exchange the PowerPoint if you like. So like that, it's there, and new investment schemes, and we have the old investment schemes. Even now, there is innovation with the countries of making their fundings. With the innovation, they are relying upon the private public partnership and the way how they become not the fund, they don't fund directly, but they are client. And this is what we have with SpaceX and NASA. Here, the competition in space. So we have these, and I will not take more time to introduce that because I'm sure that it was touched upon. So we have U.S., Russia, China, having sovereignty now and having its own space station is going to be there. So actually, the developing country will be obliged to deal there. So this is the thing, is like the other nations with the old space. It's done amazing job since all these years, but it's time to think to privatize and to invest into new space stations for research and development at least. So then here I will not speak so much about UAE because I have officials from the UAE that will speak about it, but I would like to touch base based on an article I wrote last month, and it is about I called it the new space rising star, and here how the UAE is investing first of all on its youth, is investing on the future of its nation, which is very, very important, and also continue to thrive thanks to the leaders' long-term vision and strategic foresight. The country has become one of the most attractive hosts to foreign investors, entrepreneurs, and highly qualified talents due to its economic diversification, characterized by technological transformation and the growth of its digital economy across all sectors. Very important also the way how the UAE managed the pandemic. We've seen so many people, so many investors, I know them personally, and I helped them. They moved to UAE in order to be there and to conduct their business from the UAE. So as per the UAE Central Bank quarterly Economic Review, first quarterly 2020 report, the UAE economy is leading the GCC region in its economic diversification with 70.2% of its GDP from non-oil sector. And this information, not people, they're not really aware about this, and it's important to know. So to steer its nation toward the centennial plan 2071, the long-term government plan is designed to make the UAE one of the most leading world economic powers, by which the space domain plays an essential role. And this is not taken from the UAE official what they say, but it's from a way how we see the trends and how an economic power emerge based on what they are doing and what they are investing on, and especially the capability of its youth and human development. So I will not go through all here, but very, very important that there is a lot of reforms in the UAE, and very important to know that the UAE law reform and economic development make the country an attractive ecosystem to commercial space activities. They are working on the ecosystem right now, and a lot of, for example, with the laws for liabilities and the way how to make it attractive to business owners. It's the law. It's quite transformed. And we have, for example, Dubai DOD, Department of Development, for example, has issued the guidelines with a list of more than 1,000 commercial and industrial activities that are open for 100% ownership. So before it was a cap of 51% for foreign investor or someone wants to open a company and be in the UAE, including satellites manufacturing and investment in outer space objects. I will stop here because I took, I think, so much time. I wanted to quote Her Excellency Ms. Al-Amri, the Minister of the State for Advanced Technology and Chairperson of the UAE Space Agency, explained in her interview with the National News on 21st April 2020 that developing the private sector, the space private sector, is essential to position the UAE as a global industrial hub by 2031, following the Operation 300 billion strategy. So I will stop here. I will not go to the challenges. So we hear so many challenges all the time. So the most important challenge for me to be addressed is, first of all, that you mentioned is the issue of the space law and regulations, and the other one is the issue of long-term space sustainability. And when I speak about long-term space sustainability, it's not only environmental sustainability. When we talk about sustainable development, we speak about the dimensions of sustainable development, which is social, environmental, economic, and also cultural. And we want to work about those dimensions in outer space, how when we are moving in outer space, all these dimensions are addressed, and especially the cultural dimension, and not moving with that mentality of rivalry into outer space. And also for the private actors, not act like when they first arrived to Africa in its early stages, and so many issues throughout the history is shown in the books today. So we don't want to do that, and space is risky environment, and we don't want to do that also. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. I hope these slides can be made available for the public here.
Sure.
Because they are very comprehensive. And of course, you have touched so many different aspects that we may discuss in the discussion period. Now let's go to the third presentation, which is again by Dr. Yana Robinson. I did not introduce her because I did it yesterday, and it was such a pleasure to meet her and to introduce her. Now I do it again. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I know we're a little bit over time, so I will try to keep my remarks crisp. Maybe I will step back a little bit, and we could look at the broader dynamic. I know Ms. Trabelsi already described very well the geopolitical situation, and so I will look at a little bit at the current space security landscape and look at the counter space dynamic, and as well as risks to what we call space hybrid operations, and finally mention a little bit briefly the economic and financial dimension, which I think will follow up nicely from the previous presentation. So as I mentioned yesterday during my remarks, there are now more than 4,000 active satellites in orbit. The US has up 2,505 satellites, but some 2,000 of those satellites are commercial satellites. It is followed by China, about 431, and Russia, 168 satellites. Most of those satellites are in LEO, low Earth orbit, followed by geostationary orbit. What is also important that we are witnessing expansions of existing national programs, as well as new emerging space programs globally. There's a large popularity right now of small satellites, which is anything below 500 kilograms, as well as distributed architectures. There is also an increasing desire by a number of nations to have independent access to space-based information and critical technologies. And why I say this is important is that because not all countries are going to build space infrastructures, as Ms. Tukebri mentioned. It's not that easy to build that infrastructure, especially in some of the emerging space nations. But they already can have access to the products and services and equipment that derive from there. So in that sense, even those countries are already space stakeholders today. Launch capabilities in the heads of dozens of nations. Most of them also provide commercial services, but also non-government launch services and launch space providers have emerged in recent years, and something that has been awaited and has happened already, the reusable launch vehicles, which is a big step forward also in terms of protecting the space environment, and as well as saving costs. Space applications have also proliferated very significantly, not only in military, but also civil and commercial operations. And there is an increasing link between the satellite services and the individual consumers, and also the architecture of the application is becoming much more complex with artificial intelligence related products. So a lot of thing is transforming into some kind of form of integrated applications for various purposes, which I think is very relevant for what we discussed yesterday for the socioeconomic and human security related applications also for Africa and other countries. So in short, the environment is more diverse with disruptive technologies and commercial actors. And that's why we cannot, when we look at space security, we cannot just look at the military operations, because there's so much more going on that has relevance for security. Also, importantly, the ability of nations to leverage space for defensive as well as offensive purposes is fast improving. And that means not only on the part of the major space powers, but other nations. So given this development, I think this is something that NATO is working on, but is increasingly important, is the space situational awareness, the ability to monitor the environment, and the ability to see what is happening out there 24/7, which is now a challenge. And it's an indispensable part of space security for all actors involved. I think it's fair to say, I think what was already said, that the counter space dynamic, that is the ability to disrupt, degrade, destroy, or deny space systems, is primarily driven by the terrestrial rivalries between US, China, and Russia. But unlike in the past, where space capabilities were used mainly for strategic purposes, they're now used for conventional military operations, which changes a little bit the dynamic of the threat environment. As space provides support and information and command and control of forces, the geopolitical tensions can create a potential for miscalculation or conflict that impacts the space domain. destructive anti-satellite capabilities such as ground-based co-orbital or co-orbital kinetic ASAT capabilities, electromagnetic pulse, and high-power lasers. They feature prominently due to their offensive natures, but and there is a general feeling that the sophistication and proliferation of threats have a little bit outstripped the advances in satellite resiliency and deterrent strategies. And what should be the response in the case of an attack or an incident. So we've got, for example, China that tested unsuccessfully ground-based kinetic ASAT back in 2005 and 6. And we know very well about the successful in their mind test of 2007 when it shot down its old weather satellite, and in an unfortunate manner that increased the overall amount of space debris by 30%, causing obviously problem not only for other nations' assets and also commercial companies, but also their own. One test in 2013 raised more concern as it is already reached the vicinity of geostationary orbit, which is the home of missile warning, military communications, and various ISR assets. China also demonstrated a number of rendezvous and proximity operations, for example, in 2008, 2010, 2013 or 2014. This is just, of course, from the open sources. With regard to directed energy threats, one test was back in 2006 when China illuminated a US satellite over China's territory. Of course, we've got other cyber issues and cyber attacks that are probably well known, so I'm not going to go into details. Russia also well known for its test, of course, during the Soviet days, but also are engaged today in a various proximity operations, which are has caused also concern not only part of the U.S. but also France and other countries. Beyond the growing vulnerability of satellites, I think it's very important that what I think is been already said before is that the ground systems and communications link can also be under at risk. So that means not all space threats originate in space. I think that's a very important point. In that regard, there's a worrying spectrum of gray zone operations that are basically aimed at probing gaps at preparedness and readiness to protect one's own space infrastructure. So obviously, space hybrid operations are not new. They have been here for a while, but what is different is, again, that's not only military assets, but also civilian and commercial ones that are now at greater risks of being disrupted. We defined space operations as intentional, temporary, and mostly reversible and often harmful space actions or activities that are specifically designed to exploit the links to other domains and are conducted just below the threshold of requiring meaningful military or political retaliatory responses. We've got the well-known ones as jamming or spoofing, cyber attacks, or the mentioned proximity operations and directed energy operations. But I think and these are, discussed at a lot of fora, so I think I won't go into them further. But what I would like to talk about a little bit is the issue of economic and financial operations that are also in our minds a form of hybrid operations, in a sense that they are aimed at some strategic gains. So I think that most of you know well the broader economic and financial activities of China and Russia. In terms of China, for example, the Belt and Road of 2013, Made in China 2025, China Standards 2035, or Russia's new outreach to its old Soviet allies in Africa and also elsewhere. So what we have observed is that oftentimes, as you already mentioned, that China enters the business of countries not in a free market manner. So they go into a country and they provide space-related equipment, technology, services, and financing. But the problem is that all that is oftentimes ultimately aimed at limiting the freedom and independence of the recipient space state's space sector. And I think what is important here, it's generally implemented on an incremental basis. So that's closely connected to the unsustainability of some of those space partnerships. And what is happening is that there is something that we call vertically integrated control of the space sectors by these external actors. So they provide all the infrastructure, and that is the important part here is that a lot of the services, products and equipment that derive from these infrastructures are also the one that are aimed at creating a presence at the markets, but also exerting potential influence. So our institute has done some research on this, and we have identified about 256 transactions of China and Russia in 72 countries. And I think what I would like to also mention is that it's not only developing countries that are targets, but also developed countries. For example, as we know, China has been very active in the Arctic, and it has built the space presence in Sweden, in Iceland, in Svalbard, Norway, Finland, and Greenland. And some of these caused concerns. For example, Swedish Defense Research Agency stated in December 2018 that China could be using the station, which relays images of the Arctic region to complement military intelligence and provide additional satellite surveillance in case other satellites are not available. So I think that it is also important that it's not easy to distinguish, because of the nature of the Chinese space program, it is not easy to distinguish the military and civilian part of it. And that's why it is also very difficult to make assessments in terms of the economic domain, because a lot of the state-owned enterprises or state-controlled enterprises or quasi-private companies are basically directed through their national security law and have to report back or comply with requirements of the Chinese Communist Party. So that makes them not a traditional commercial companies as you would think of ones in, let's say, in Europe or the United States or Japan or Korea or elsewhere. So I think that I'd like to just conclude with the thought that because the space capabilities are of dual use nature, there is a active diplomacy required that enhances transparency of space activities and promotes greater confidence about among all space actors. We should also understand that satellites and related space infrastructure, especially the civil and commercial one, often lack sufficient defense mechanisms and could be attractive targets. And also what is important is the asymmetry of vulnerabilities and effects of incidents. And importantly, we don't have so much precedence with regard to how to react to hybrid operations. So it kind of complicates predictability of those outcomes. And those advances in space technology, such as nanosatellites, distributed architectures, or electric propulsion and others, present, I think, new challenges for SSA. So I think importantly also countries that are entering the space business, they should be provided assistance by advanced space actors, but that has to be conducted in a fair, transparent, and commercial fashion that preserves the space sector independence of the nations that are receiving the assistance. So we need to emphasize market principles, disclosure, transparency, proper risk management, good governance, and the rule of law, so we can avoid some kind of long-term consequences of dependencies and even other risks. So with this, I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. another good addition to our consideration. Considering now what has been said, because now we are going to start right away the debate with yourself and possibly from outside via the internet. I have a first question, because very little reference has been made in this discussion about the geostrategic competition with Russia. Of course, China appears to be the main competitor, but I believe that we should, at least for a while, still consider Russia as at least an actor and, of course, a possible competitor. I would like to hear the, the opinion of the panelists on this.
I think that there's a lot of discussions about China just because of the amount of financial investments that they're making in all kinds of military technologies. But of course, you know, Russia remains a large concern. And if we talk in space in particular, you know, we have seen you know, the Russians have been struggling financially, for example, you know, due to all the sanctions that have been imposed on it after the invasion of Crimea. But that said, so for example, they have had issues to launching their new space launch vehicles. But if you see in terms of military investments, it has really remained flat. It hasn't really it's just that the Russians have been needing to prioritize more in terms of, you know, for example, fielding GLONASS, which is their priority. But they have been doing a lot of on orbit activities that have caused concerns on the part of other nations. As you know, the well-known one is the one targeting French military assets. So I think that we continue to perceive Russia in the same, you know, and with their actual experience in operations in space. I think that you know, we don't see, you know, that China is a bigger threat or smaller threat. They're just more strategic, longer term threat. But I think Russia remains a concern in that regard.
Thank you.
I would like to mention a point on that concern that I also forgot to mention it. By the way, now at that moment, my team is presenting a paper regarding the cybersecurity for NATO as operational domain. And that's also, we particularly targeted just to mention the importance of this point, because this is affecting a lot the MENA region. Here, mentioning Russia, so Russia, I am quite close to some programs that they are doing, because they are investing a lot in the North African region right now. I think you are aware of some contracts that they are trying to do with the Tunisian government, sending the first female astronaut. And this is among the programs they're trying to do, because they understood that investing in MENA region is a crucial point. First, in terms of all the in-orbit operations that my colleague just mentioned, but also all what concerns the security, also the activities in terms of Earth observation, space exploration. So they are already making a huge step so far. And talking again about the cybersecurity, you know, so here this is the main problem that everyone talks about. So there is lots of new technology that is developed in China, in Russia, and in the big space leaders. I don't know if we will talk about this or if it's really something worth mentioning right now, but I will talk maybe myself and my colleague can talk a little bit more about this, about the quantum technology. This is something that we will all need to think about. And China is the country that invested the most on that concern. And this is something that we have really to pay attention to, because Russia is conducting a serious research on quantum technology for securing data, for just, and you know, the person that will be securing his own data is the strength, has a strength point over here, over globally, and also for the MENA region. And I believe that this is, Russia should be considered as exactly as the same as China. Probably China has made already further steps before everyone, but Russia is following the path. So just maybe Malak can talk a little bit more about quantum technology that is quite, this is a very interesting topic we really need to think about, and we really need to invest on this, either for developed spacefaring countries or also for developing countries, either in terms of implementation of quantum computers or just maybe starting designing the first quantum satellites like Michio's satellite of China, or even like talking about the specific research that we need to make on that concern. Thank you.
Yeah, to add to that, actually, yeah, as Dr. Jana mentioned, Russia on the military side is not to neglect, of course, but the focus on, from my point of view, on this pole driven by the two rivals, which is United States and allies from one side and China from the other side, because actually Russia is in the pole of China. So we have two, and they are in one basket, and you have the other party, which is alarming. So to touch upon the quantum technologies in space, I've been raising awareness about the ethical use of technologies, and I got into the quantum ecosystem, and I advise business advisory and legal advisories to quantum startups and researchers and PhDs that they are involved, they want to make their patents. And the thing is, like, when I see the emergence of the quantum, let's say, the idea that the next race is the quantum race, is not the space race, because the quantum is going to define the space race. So this is the first point. And the second point is the increased race in quantum technologies can be witnessed and seen with the funds that it is poured in quantum technologies by governments. So here I refer to UK, Germany, I refer to United States, of course, and each one, of course, has its own quantum strategy and what they want, the plan, what they want to focus on. Some of them are focused on quantum communications, others they are focused on quantum computing. So here, why quantum technologies are very, very important to address when it comes to the space endeavors, because quantum encryption, for example, and it's your thing that you are working on, Rania, is anticipated solution to massive security issue with regards to space residents, satellites in space. So very, very important. Since it's known that the race will offer a competitive advantage to governments, to states, to prevent hacker from espionage and other threats, in addition to quantum computing capabilities, which they are working on. It's not harnessed yet, of course, but it's on the way. And one day we're going to wake up and we say, one country did it, and they are already, they want quantum computing. And it will enable the capabilities of quantum computing. It will enable military tactics with greater accuracy, which is very, very important for the military forces. So, and successful, let's not forget about the successful launch of the Chinese Michio's satellite in 2016, which is already there, and it's the first quantum satellite in space. So it set up the first intercontinental cryptology service using quantum cryptography. And I think you can speak about, Rania, about the use of quantum cryptography in space and how it's going to have a competitive advantage into the space race, if you like. If you have IPs about it, don't.
Well, this is a topic of my PhD. Maybe I can give you the results in a few years. But yes, actually, 2 points I'd like to mention here. This is, if up to now, so the most secure methods for data that I think that the government should consider is basically quantum communication. And also, you should know that quantum computers are quite expensive, a lot. So the investment there is huge. But in terms of technology, so there is different methods for quantum communication. There is the hard, let's say the hardware use of quantum communication and the software use. So here, I won't go into details, but I would say that we can start with the software solutions that won't cost a lot. Probably we can start making few tests. There is still a lot of research going on, so we still didn't discover it yet. And I think University of Austria, I think there is a lot of collaboration with China, yes, and also Russia, that are very put in lots of investment on that concern. Yes, probably we can have another panel discussion about quantum communication, right, Malak?
Yes. It's quite interesting.
You have any question? Let's start. We start with, okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a fascinating panel. So as we think about future competition in space, you know, we think about whether it's state versus state, corporation versus corporation, or state versus corporation. But my question to you is, for the states and for the corporations, you know, we've talked about COVID-19 a little bit here and how that showcased certain things. How resilient is the space enterprise in states and in corporations? And specifically, you know, what kind of vulnerability does that create for the MENA region as we see these threats and these risks to our space capabilities? Because we know that more and more nations and societies are dependent on the products that we get from space.
Let's collect another question.
If you don't mind, even if it's somewhat related, it's not exactly the same. Yesterday, we tackled the issue of cooperation in many fields within the region to bring forward the space capabilities of the nations there, being that cooperation in education, cooperation in the proper industry, also in funding. Today, I understood from the first panelist that you will foresee in the long term kind of competition between nations within the region. But I understood it was being, let's say, in the commercial field, within the market space, let's say so. But if we couple that with the two later panelist discussions of the existence of a competition at the strategic level, let's say so, between the major powers in the field, how much alignment do you foresee in the future of the individual nations in the region with the major powers that would prevent that competition and collaboration at the same time to exist? So it's kind of a deviation from what we have right now. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Over there? And then again, the word to you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists. I just want to elaborate more with regards to UAE's educational system. So in UAE, we have 4 research centers focused in space. They are also offering a space laws degree. University of Sharjah offer a dedicated degree in space law, and also University of Khalifa. They offer space technologies minor degree. As a good example for our cooperation, we have students coming from Bahrain. They were working in their master degrees, and they were able to do their first CubeSat in collaboration with UAE, which will be launched later this year. Also, we have a research center dedicated for astronomy and physics in UAE. So these research centers are open for all, not only for MENA and Gulf countries, but all countries to come and do their master, PhD degrees in research of space. And we welcome all, of course, to utilize these infrastructures. And just to add more, last week during Expo Week, we announced Space Economic Zone program. As part of this program, we open all of our infrastructure and laboratories to be used for any research entities or people who want to do testing for space components in our laboratories. So of course, we open all and welcome all to utilize these programs that we announced and for further collaboration with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for this offer. It's interesting, and I hope that someone will take these opportunities.
So yeah, just to add to what my colleague Abdullah just mentioned, so these programs are there, and these programs are actually targeting mainly, again, like the region, and also countries from outside the region. So as a UAE, we'd like to offer these opportunities, but then we try to highlight it, but sometimes within the region, we don't feel that there's, how to say, like engagement. So sometimes there is a commitment from our side, but we need also commitment from the other side to send students. We will be able to sponsor certain things, cover certain costs, but then there's certain aspects of selection or for example, sponsoring a student needs to be covered by the concerned country. So this is one thing that I feel that's one of the challenges that we have. So it's not that we don't have any programs. We do have programs within the region. But who is utilizing it? That's the question. And sometimes, you know, you cannot just expect one side to do everything. You need both sides to communicate and needs to be kind of an initiative from the other side also to utilize what we have available to everyone.
No, this is, let me make just an observation on this, because I try to relate what has been just said with where we are today here in the hub of the Mediterranean. And I believe that the hub could take a role of mediator between the countries in the MENA region and the opportunities which can be offered. This is just an idea, but I think that it is worthwhile to explore its feasibility, because it would give the hub a real role in enhancing the mutual understanding, because cooperation is the practical thing, but the overall environment is understanding each other and solving the problems before they become problems. But then I have to give the word to our panelists if they want to react to what has been asked by our public.
Just to clarify, you were talking about resiliencies of our companies and enterprises, or about, is that was your question, right? Or of the space. Are you talking about like the new companies, or generally a startup? Oh, okay. Right. I mean, I think there's a difference between when we consider the traditional majors that are delivering products to the U.S. government, let's say, or in Europe, you know, you've got the big four delivering capabilities for European needs. So I would probably, you know, separate them a little bit from some of these new commercial companies that are coming up. I think the important part is the moving from the startups phase to actually becoming a viable company. I think it will not be possible without some support of the US government. I know that, like, for example, in the US, Europe is also working on how to provide investments to these companies because they always have to look for markets, and sometimes the markets are long-term vision, you know, such as the asteroid mining or these things. So I think the companies have to find a viable business strategy before they move into these long-term profitability. And then you've got other companies like that are able to provide services pretty quickly within 3 years, and those can be launched. But a lot of, I mean, obviously, like in any other business, I would say a lot of the new startups won't survive, but I think that there's a really big variety of them that can become viable business. And I think this goes then hand in hand to the second question, which is, the competition versus cooperation. And that means, what kind of space governance for markets are we creating? And I think the problem is that a lot of time we are, our companies have to follow pretty strict rules in terms of their accounting and corporate governance, and being responsible to their investors. That is not the case always with the Chinese, for example, Russian companies, or any kind of subsidized businesses. So it can be also other countries. And I think that this is something that we need to pay more attention as the business is expanding globally. today. And one of the issues will be for our companies is, you know, as those new markets are being created with the downstream business, you know, with the services and products, is to what extent we can create a fair business environment, you know. And I think that should be our goal. I think this is our goal, to emphasize the fact that, you know, all the countries that joined the World Trade Organization have committed to open free market, and China has committed to, for example, the liberalization of their economy, and actually they're now going in a completely different direction, which also has implications. But if we can speak in concrete terms, for example, you know, they do provide. When I talked about providing all those package deals, one of the problems is that oftentimes they provide also 100% subsidized loans. The problem with that is that it's not for free. You know, like there's always something that has to give when the country is not able to repay the debts. Oftentimes those contracts are undisclosed. They have to sign a non-disclosure clause. So oftentimes we don't know, you know, what the contracts are, and they're probably sometimes not complying with the international trading rules, for example, no non-Paris clause and others. So in that sense, I think that is a problem for the recipient. And that's why maybe when we talk about Africa, when we talk about other countries in Latin America, Southeast Asia, you know, every country has to make that call, right? Like, to what extent do you want to become indebted with your really strategic area of investment? And I think sometimes I don't know whether there is enough awareness of what kind of dependency is being created, and if there is, you know, is there enough safeguarding mechanisms in each country to prevent some of these unfair investments. And I think also what is happening is that kind of influence created through the proliferation of services. This is very visible, for example, in the GNSS area, where, of course, you know, when we look at GPS today has over 3 billion users. Of course, it's been on the market for 30 years, right? But if you look at China, has declared a pay-to operational in August 2022, and in Southeast Asia, they already have over 150 million users, you know. So, you know, if we look forward, if we want to look at that long-term prospects of how we remain competitive, you know, we have to also consider these trends, that those infrastructures that then enable proliferations of those important services that are critical oftentimes for these countries. And I think that needs to be part of that security equation, you know. And so that would be probably from my side. Yeah.
Yes, I'll go to the second question directly. So talking about the competition internally and let's say globally. So yes, what I wanted to mention here is that the competition, geopolitical competition here is, or let's say race, if I may call the word. So here my colleagues mentioned it perfectly. And here we have the big roles of China and United States, European Union, and all these spacefaring countries that are doing already a big role in developing their own capabilities and also the capabilities in the MENA region. So it's always dependent on a lot of political background. So, and here the same, what I'd like to mention for internal competition. So here for the internal competition, there is some already previous political issues or political background between certain countries. I think you all heard about certain conflicts between Algeria and Morocco. And here, the space sector is quite a very sensitive topic on that concern. So here, it's a bit, I won't talk into details because maybe the nationals will be better positioned to talk about this. But over here, the number of satellites you launch, the kind of satellites you launch, the mission that you will have, this is something quite important that I won't use the word advisory, but I will use the word your other country that you may have conflict with should really know about this. So here it's quite important to have clear policy and clear space laws, and here the experts should are very useful on that concern, and we should really pay attention to the conventions signed and to the different limits between the countries. And I don't know if you are following a little bit what's happening in the African Union, but on the space concern, there is a lot of discussions going on for example, where we will be having the African Space Agency, uh, who will be taking care of certain projects, which projects will be affected to which country. You have to know that it's not only one or two countries. We talk about certain countries that are starting on the same at the same time. We talk about Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, Egypt. So these countries have already started a lot of, they are becoming quite strong now in terms of space capabilities. And that's of course thanks to the collaboration that has been done with European countries, with China and USA. So of course they are quite important in supporting, if I may use the word properly, supporting the development of these countries. And these two ways of competition in regional and global, they are working always together in parallel since forever. So in space, that should be also very well considered in terms of conventions that we will have in terms of cooperation. So in the African Union, there are a lot into cooperation. They try to repeat this word a lot because that's if it's not gonna be the case, it's gonna be really blocking the development of the sector in the region. And I don't know if I covered everything. There is also many other sectors in space that is quite worth talking when we talk about competition. For example, the lunar mining or the moon mining. So that's something that South Africa is really into it, Egypt as well, Nigeria as well, and even Tunisia. We started even thinking about this and how to invest. And Tunisia basically doesn't have any kind of real national program. So here, this is something, there is still a race internally and between countries, and we try to see who can take over the power in space, either in terms of projects and vision, and as well in terms of security, and how we can really secure our data to protect ourselves in terms of defensive methods. Basically, I won't go deeply into the political games or maybe for the space laws or the policies. Maybe my colleague is better expert on this. So that's, I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
If I may answer the first question, actually, Dr. Robinson explained, I would elaborate on the startups because this is where I am close and active with. So the startups, internationally, the startup ecosystem in space industry is what one of the paper talking about this new space economy clearly mentioned Darwinism. Darwinism in the space sector, and this is economist work. So I start using the word after that because actually we have Darwinism, and you have, as we know it in Darwin. So it's you have so many startups came about the same time the last few years. And then they disappear, and Darwin is working. The problem with the startup that I face is wishful thinking, a lot of wishful thinking, lack of long-term strategy, lag, like over-promising the investors if there are investments, lag between the when the ROI is going to be achieved. So and even one step further, I make research and wrote a paper about the space economy measurement. And there is one issue about measuring the space economy. Even what we have today as data, it's not properly accurate. And even OECD wrote about it, and they during their gathering in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh in 2020, it was one of the main points, because if you are an entrepreneur and you based your feasibility and business plan and study and everything on particular numbers and data and everything, and later on the data is not accurate, it can have an influence. And the other point is like why the space economy measurement, when we say it's 4 billion, or it's not really accurate, because actually there is a lot of double measurement between the upstream, midstream, and the downstream, or what it was called there in the chart. So startups resilience is not only about COVID-19, it's about the startup ecosystem itself. It's nascent, researchers, engineers, they enter into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. They don't have really good background about that. And here comes the national programs that they are working on how to help and how to make their, let's say, how to fund them if they want to fund certain startups in certain area, but also help them to receive investments from outside, especially in countries like in Africa. We have very, very good engineers with good patents. They have patents, but they don't have the know-how and they don't know how to commercialize. Thank you. We try to make them. You have a startup, yeah? I just launched a startup. Yes, yes, yes. So yeah, there are a lot of women. Also, they are coming from the scientific background, and we help them to steer their startups, and a lot of mentorship is there. It's very, very important also for getting the entrepreneur move forward in order not to fail. It's important. Thank you.
Hello, it's Iman here. It's just to talk more about like the cooperation aspects between our countries. The problem, I mean, the challenge, the biggest challenge in our MENA countries and also in Africa is the fact that, as we talked about it yesterday, is like people don't really understand that we can put civilian space alone and military space alone. So maybe creating a framework or having sort of mediators and special legal frameworks from like other countries, like for example inside the African Union. If we want to talk about like the Algerian-Moroccan geopolitical conflicts and the problems that we have, one of the biggest strategies of and biggest concerns of the African Union, I think, is like to put a sort of bureau which is a mediator to just like put the framework of all the social economic problems that needs to be addressed, and to let alone whatever it is related to military or geopolitical problems. We somehow can see that in other bigger nations, even if it's like the concerns are not the same. But like I believe personally that if we could try to, even if it's really hard and sometimes quite impossible to put the both things or separate them in general, is to try at least to have like a scientific or academic um, managers or decision makers to control this kind of issues that can happen. Cooperation is important. Technology transfer, like inside, is important, like between internally in the region, from outside as well. I mean, most of the countries in the MENA region are already are just like having technology transfer from like the West, the US, Russia, China, Europe, and Japan. But like also like internally, because most of the countries have somehow started or are starting from the same point as the other big nations, because Africa is still a spacefaring continent. So to just sum up, it's like we really need mediators to work on that if we want to, I mean, help that that industry or to have like a sustainable ecosystem in the continent. So thank you.
If I may just add 2 words on what she said, because that's quite important. In 2 words, what is missing and what's the problem in the MENA region, mainly for Africa, is the lack of, first of all, the governance and the lack of neutral entities that can deal with such issues. Maybe African Union is playing a good role, an important role, but in terms of space capabilities, they didn't reach the maturity to deal with such issues. So what we tried to do in terms of Space Generation or all the other organizations affected to UN is to reach out to try to provide recommendations on that concern. So we do need a very good governance. We need to work about this. We need to affect all the stakeholders. We need to sit together to talk about because we have basically common interests. What concerns the Earth observation satellites, the outputs, like data coming out from the Earth observation satellites for disaster management, it can touch both Algeria and Morocco, and they have basically the same issues, both countries. So we can work a little bit on this, and also the independency. That's quite important, to have some specific local activities that are quite independent, plus other activities that should be in common between the whole nations, because there has been lots of political issues between the African countries in the past, and if we make this continue in the space sector, that's gonna be quite chaotic and quite really problematic. And also, Malak mentioned something very important, is the use, like we have to give a big importance on the private sector, because that can solve lots of problems, and the private sector can play a major role into solving many issues without considering a nation, a specific nation, or a specific conflict. So that's going to be a neutral entity as well, if we may use the word. And I think we can just go over these issues, because it's going to be blocking the whole region.
Okay, so I just want to shed the light on the economic and financial dimension from the UAE perspective. We understand that the private sector is actually our partners in the development of the space sector. And for them to flourish, or for even startups to grow in their presence within the UAE, there are specific requirements that we need to satisfy as a government. First of all, what's important is that for any private company is that the country that they are targeting should have economic stability. So this is very important. Another aspect is the ease of access. We provide them access to opportunities in terms of participating in our national projects, as well as access to the other countries within the region. The foreign ownership is also a very important aspect. So within the UAE, we have the 100% foreign ownership, which is an added value for them. The existence of expertise within the country, this is also important, whether it's in terms of providing guidance and the development of their, let me say, program or startup, or even in terms of exchange of expertise. The ease of establishment. So us as government, we need to have clear policies, to have even a clear vision of where we want, of what are we aspiring to achieve within the space sector. So they know what their added value will be, and at that time they will have an input that is viable for us and them as well. The inclusion of the private companies in national projects, as I mentioned, is very vital for their success. So these are all considerations that needs to be taken seriously. And what Abdullah mentioned in terms of the economic zone. So the current focus for us is to create space economic zone within the different cities in the country. The economic zone here, we mentioned the presence of different, in a single area, the presence of government entity working collaboratively with private companies, as well as the presence of investors and all of this. So we are enriching the ecosystem, and in that way we can draw, like you can say, a success story. They will be adding a value to our, let me say, priorities or needs, and at the same time we will allow them to grow and flourish as well. Imran, you wanted to add a value?
Thank you, Fatma. Actually, if I may, it's a slightly different point. It's more about, it's actually, this comment is not directed towards the panelists. It's directed to NATO and NATO Hub. And it's more of my perspective on the geostrategic competition and the long-term outlook of the region, and things that I think maybe it's might be helpful for the team in NATO to consider. If you go back to the objectives of this gathering here, I guess is for us to understand, I guess, NATO's perspective, but also for NATO to understand our perspective on things and come up with recommendations that help both sides. I'll try to keep it brief. From my perspective, actually, I mean, when it comes to the region, if you look at it, or let's say the South, as NATO categorizes it, it's quite diverse when it comes to space programs. You have space programs with a vision that leads it. You have a space program that is basically, again, led by more of an operational, tactical needs that the nation has. And then you have ones that are more like enthusiastic about space and saying that we have a space program. And I think it's very important to categorize nations separately and look at each one case by case. I guess when it comes to the ones with the vision, that's more of a long-term kind of a program that they would have. And it's the ones that you have to look at it as in what directions they're going into and how that could serve NATO. The ones that are more focused on tactical and operational ones, that has, I guess, certain needs that they have. Maybe currently all of them, these nations tend to have the tendency to go and acquire their own space assets and operate them. I think in the medium term or long term, eventually that's going to change because of the costs associated with it. So they're going to probably start realizing sooner or later that they're better off either forming a regional alliance to send space assets, or aligning themselves with a global power to get those services from them. And then again, the ones that are enthusiastic about space, probably that's going to be focused more, I guess, on educational or like small programs, and maybe that's something that NATO could explore to start working on maybe soft aspect of things, the soft power between NATO nations and these nations. And then when it comes, I guess, to threat or risk, unfortunately, when it comes to the South, you cannot just have like I don't know, that's unfortunately or fortunately, actually, you cannot just have like a blanket, as in, okay, they are a threat or they are not a threat. Because each nation have alliances with different global powers, and it's messy. It's really messy. And I think it's critical for NATO to start building relations with countries that could be considered as allies or partners for NATO, and understanding their capability and how that's going to serve their needs to offset certain risks, whether it's in the West or somewhere else. And also NATO needs to start understanding the countries that are more aligned with maybe with certain specific Eastern powers that pose a threat to NATO, and how these nations in the South could be used by those Eastern powers through their space assets to cause a risk for NATO. And that's going to require a lot of work, and that's going to require a lot of deep understanding. That's again, it's about the geopolitics of the region, about the political relationship between each country in the region and the global powers, whether it's in the West or the East. And I would hope that maybe, I mean, this discussion actually, even though it's a panel, but I think it's a very, very important topic that I think half a day or like one panel is not sufficient to cover all the different aspects of it, as we saw by the panelists, the way they spoke about it. And again, we should focus, I guess, more on the countries and in the South and their role in all of this and how NATO perceived them. That's just a comment on my side to the team at NATO. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for these remarks, which I believe can open some door to further developments. And I hope that, I'm sure that these stimulus will be taken by those who are responsible for conducting the follow-on to this event, which must not, of course, remain an isolated event in just as a good initiative to meet together, and to get to know each other, but it must be a step forward along a road which is, in a way, compulsory if we want to obtain the benefits which are at hand. I would like also to ask another, not another question, but to explore something more about the legal situation. Because I believe that we still are in a way in the need of further rules, at least in some fields. Let me just quote two issues. The first issue is the weaponization of space. We have so far a very clear rule which forbids to put nuclear weapons in orbit, forbids military activity on the moon, but does not forbid military activity or does not regulate military activity in orbit. And we have seen recent examples of activities which for sure are related to military activity. Therefore, I think that we should stimulate some thoughts in this field in order to at least define some rules which could be taken by those who are who have the capabilities to act militarily in space. And the second one has already been alluded in, is related to the rules in order to avoid the danger on the ground. The issue of debris has been quoted several times, and I was really shocked when some months ago there was a huge Chinese satellite which was deorbited, apparently without any precautions to what could happen on the ground, hoping that it would fall into the sea, which it did eventually, but this is not granted, I mean. And I believe that, again, here we should establish some rules in order to convince the operating nations to take the necessary cautions so to avoid any real danger on the ground. And I think whether you want to develop this theme shortly.
Thank you for the question. I always like to avoid the term weaponization of space. I don't think it's very helpful to the discussions because space has been always part of military operations since the very beginning, and I think it actually doesn't define the threat and risks in the right manner. I would say that there are two major approaches to what should be done in terms of protecting the space environment. On one side, we have China and Russia that have been proposing a legal instrument in the Conference on Disarmament that would ban technologies, basically, certain technologies. And the I think opinion of European countries as well as the United States and others such as Japan or are such that this is a very tricky prospect, because how do you define the constantly evolving technologies? How do you define it in a treaty? I'm not a lawyer, but I imagine this would be a very difficult task. So there has been a focus on space behavior and norms of responsible behavior. And I think this is a focus that will continue to be at the forefront of the space governance discussion. I mean, when I was at the EU, we were working on the code of conduct, which at the end did not obviously receive approval from a lot of nations, but I think it had good principles of three main things, which is you should inform other countries of your national space policies and of your plans. You should consult before conducting potentially harmful operations, and also you should notify. For example, if you're launching a satellite, you should conduct proper notifications as is directed. So I think these are the basic principles that I think the space community now needs to go into in-depth discussions in terms of what those norms are specifically mean. I think also when you will get to the problem of attribution, which will be, again, a political issue, this is something that is very difficult right now in the space. So I think that's just from a broad overview.
Yeah, I try to stay away from the weaponization, militarization, and all these kind of subjects. More focus on the commercial side of it. But of course, space law, international space law, big problem, at least for me, because actually I see some practitioners or people from academia, they say it's fine, it will be working on its own, and so no, it will not. We have voids. For now, the space treaties, they are very old. They are the product of the Cold War and did not move forward. Even the language of the space treaties, like if we are sitting and we, for example, if there is any problems happening and there's a judge needs or arbitrators need to look at the treaties to try to check what is said, the language is vague, so many terminology without definitions. We still have issues between the real borders between the outer space when it starts, when it comes to liability and the airspace field domain. The problem, some they say the Kármán line became customary, but it's not true, because we have some countries they don't consider that, and they put their sovereignty up to much further. So the thing is, like, when we are more active in space and there's liabilities of country comes into stake, we still do not have the proper mechanism of finality of the issue. It goes by diplomatic means, and here comes some of the issues that happened before, and I think Russia had to pay Canada for the liability for the damage it happened on its soul. And here we have commercial actors, and this is what is the problem really today. We have commercial actors that they need to be bound by the law. We have national laws, they bound them. But when it comes to international liability and responsibility of states, and here is the problem, how we're going to move forward. Also the ethical side of technologies and the problems of the dual use. So there is so much is going on, for example, with China, with the hypersonic, it's ironically last week, I think they tried one of the missiles, and how we'll stop that. So if there's no consensus, even if they sign a treaty, how it will be enforced? What is the governance that is going to be there in order to hold that country liable for anything happening? What's going to happen later on when we start having on-orbit servicing and there is a proximity issues? So, and there is really a liability because of satellite damage. And even to prove the damage, who caused the damage, is difficult because it's out there. How we're going to prove it? Even though we would have the scientific, we think, but there is the language in the treaty, who caused the damage. So how to know who caused that damage? So many things. Also the liability of the space debris that it's happening, who has its satellite up there, and there's an issue from the space debris. There is rules on that, but how it's going to be when it is in practical, how it's going to be happening. Problem of sustainability, and now we are moving. The international space law is moving forward through soft laws and codes of conduct. And here there's a problem. It's not binding. So it becomes up to the party or the stakeholder to apply that. And here I come from my side of what I do, because international space law, it could be touching IP rights, it could be touching cybersecurity and everything. And you have some practitioners that are specialized in different things. So from my side, I work on contracts, so and I am specialized in space insurance. So when it comes to that, I say the space insurer or the contractual obligations can define specific acts and obligations and rights between the party, and it can play a big role in moving to what we call lex mercatoria. It's the law of the merchant. If the states, they don't want to come on one table and finalize specific rules. So here comes the role of private actors in order to be responsible to fill a gap, and that lex mercatoria. So we start by making, this is the way how the contracts, or we agree about certain rules of contracts, and it becomes customary law. It becomes customary. It becomes lex mercatoria, which is very, very important. But for the weaponization, and it's I prefer to stay away from it.
It's another issue. Yes, sure.
Thank you.
If I may add
yes,
something.
Please.
Okay,
Please,
I'd
and
like
then,
to.
And then you.
Yes, okay, I'd like to add another perspective, actually, from my background, my technical background. So, okay, talking about the space law and talking about the treaties and talking about the conventions and the what we have to sign between countries. So there is something you should really consider. So we are still new. If we would like really to sign anything or write any kind of convention, we still don't know very well what are the worst case scenarios, what can really happen out there. So we know we can define laws, we can define treaties, we can define policy, but we are not mature enough, let's say, to define everything so far. So what I see here is that it's quite important to talk about this a little bit technically. So now I think that what has been mentioned here is just coming up to a conclusion to create a kind of neutral entities that will take care of controlling and take care of implementing and checking that everything is there perfectly. It's gonna be like a technical and legal entity that will take care of everything. I say well technically because we really don't know very well how to take care of the orbiting satellites. We started, of course, doing, but we still don't have all the capabilities to make it. We don't know very well how to mitigate with the space debris. It's still a big issue for us, technically. And there is lots of issues that we still didn't mention yet, but also the cybersecurity. So we don't all of us know how to deal with these cyber threats. It's a big issue. So, and we cannot talk about, for example, China has a lot of research on that concern. They will define a specific technology that all of us, we will care about. This is gonna be like a political, it will create political issues. So I am always into this kind of neutral entities, technical and legal entities that will take care of implementing this. So also for the launch of satellites, the number of satellites to be launched, the missions that will be there, the number of missions in the low Earth orbit, on the geo orbit as well. That's quite a very sensitive topic, and we should think about this first technically and its feasibility, if it's really, if you are really able to make it, and in order to write down at the end the legal treaties and all the conventions, and to be sure that we covered up all the worst case scenarios. And I think we have very good lawyers, but the it's still not yet very well mature, in my opinion, to define this, to define everything now.
So,
Hi. What is it? I want to thank the speakers because I work with entrepreneurs. I'm also a lawyer. And what I want to touch upon is we cannot think of all the possible worst scenarios. And that is, if you put yourself on that mission, forget it, because you will die forever, always having possible scenarios, like is it Fibonacci? But you understand the simulations, the possibilities, impossible. One variant is enough to change your scenarios in so many ways. But I want to share something with you as a parallel, and I think one of the colleagues here mentioned about maritime law, because my background's in maritime before I got into space law. So I worked on autonomous shipping, and I worked on the regulations of it, whereby the whole discussions are quite similar. As an example, so you talk about traffic management, and you talk about collision avoidance, and you talk about warning systems and training and the whole works. What was interesting for me was at the time I was also working as a in the Coast Guard in the vessel policy, so advising. And one of the things we worked as a set of 15 lawyers, and then we got the experts, the engineers, everyone in. What was interesting, because we as lawyers, we talk comfortably about liability because it's our day job, but I know it frightens people when they hear, oh my gosh, liability. What ended up happening was the proposal was passed through the UK government, and then it broadened up into a working group at the IMO, International Maritime Organization. And then it got applied amongst the industry. And as I observed, as the lawyer who suggested the idea of liability, and there's a study which I can share with you all, it was done through EDA, is I didn't like, as someone who is obviously an advocate of safety and all this kind of stuff, is it went from liability to the scaring the whole industry to dominating the whole discussions. And this is where the balance has to be made. The technology is new. We don't know what the limits are, the challenges are. So when we have the laws and regs, it can limit innovation, actually limit innovation. So yes, we should have guidance. We should know what the ballpark rules of the games are, so we know the parameters, but we definitely cannot have a hardening position. We cannot say this is wrong, because we actually don't know. And this is where it gets interesting, because, if all the explorers said, if we all travel, the world is flat, we will fall off the edge and die. We don't know. We might come home safely. So I think there is a huge element of being comfortable with the unknown, being curious, exploratory, and say, you know what, if we launch these, we need to be comfortable in knowing it will get lost. Right now, one of the biggest discussions, and I'm glad my friend here mentioned about insurance, because I used to work for ELSCO, which is the biggest space insurer, is the startups actually have to lobby the industries, the traditional industries, to say, guys, when I buy a car, I have insurance. When I buy this satellite, but this small sat, you don't know how to reinsure me or insure me. And the greatest challenge is it's like there's an analogy where you have a hole and a square, and they try to put the two together, because the startups are saying the industries treat me like a satellite. I'm not a satellite. I'm a small sat. I'm not 500K. I'm 50K. I'm 2K. And so the pricing should be accordingly. And I had the opportunity of actually advising I mentioned to some colleagues, advising the Japanese government how to double their space sector. The biggest space industry players like Mitsubishi are looking at me and like, Helen, so how can I get my customer to trust this startup when there's no insurance? And I say, very, very good point. In the same way, and SpaceX is exceptional, really. But in the same way, how can you get industry players to trust whoever that's not Boeing, whoever's not Thales or Telepazio? So there's a huge element of trust, but there's also a huge element of, I mentioning to one of the colleagues yesterday, space is high risk, high return. So it's like when you hit the jackpot, you hit big, but you will fail many, many times before you hit the jackpot. Now, assuming we're all interested to go into space, everyone has a role. So the high risk investors play a role because they invest in the startups with a good chance of 50-50. So maybe 50% we go to space, 50% we fail. So that's the understanding. So it's not 99% accuracy, like say in the public sector, because you can't risk it. You're paying, your taxpayers' money. Everyone's going to have an outcry and they will shut down whatever space operation you're thinking of, right? And then we have the lawyers who obviously act as the like the Coast Guard, like the guard keepers, and say, "Oi, we need to think about health and safety. We need to think about all of this." And the public is so important because the public, i.e., your grandchildren, your uncle and aunt, they are the end user, and the end user is going to drive the whole sector. Now, when I do my speeches, I say, I have a mobile phone. The mobile phone has a chip. The chip is linked to a satellite. We are all space users. So the storytellers, i.e., everyone outside of this room, the grandkids, the young kids, the adults, they need to start talking about space not as something that excites them in 50 years. They need to talk about it. Yeah, I use that. I use space technology. And with that, we have critical mass. We get the support because we rely on our phones now. We cannot live without our mobile phone. If you cannot live with mobile phone, you cannot live with space technology. And if people understand this logic, they will no longer look at space as the formidable, we are not accessing, it's impossible. No, it's here now. We need to, how can I say, respectfully work together, talk to each other, because if your mobile phone shuts down, your world shuts down. So I think I'm so sorry I didn't hear the main part, but I love the conversation here because this is so needed, right? Because everyone has that role and no one can be more dominant. It's like someone said to me in engineering, you've got a few variables: resources, timing, and maybe human capacity. If either one is imbalanced, the project will fail for all sorts of reasons. And I think this is it. It's like we're all trying to swim in one direction, but if some player is too faster than the other, or one side is too overweight than the other, the ship will sink. So I think what I'm trying to say is this is an amazing foundation to start, but then I think the hub, which is a bit unconventional, is the outreach. So for example, maybe it's not normal in usual these government settings to talk about, reaching out to the public, having, because these public consultations, it's important, and also getting people's views is equally important, because I think at the end of the day, the downstream, i.e. the end user, is going to be the powerful decider of whether we do end up going to space. Because, we think about lobbying, we think about the power of humanity, right? So if humanity doesn't agree, doesn't want us to go to space, even though we're enthusiasts, we can wait another 50 to 100 years. It won't happen. But if everyone is excited, everyone wants to be part of it, then there's no question we will get there faster. So sorry, that was my long-winded contribution. Thank you.
I'd love really to just to add something. I really loved how you described those things, and I really liked how you mentioned that we are going to something we don't know and we have to go into it. And you're right. So we cannot really define everything. But I'll talk as an engineer. So when I design a satellite or a system within the satellite, I cannot make a step without defining what we call the technical requirements. The technical requirements will define if the satellite can go in outer space or cannot do this. And this, it's not because we know very well how satellites, for example, for space exploration work, but we know, for example, how a flash memory works, how onboard computer works, how instrument payloads work. We have quite a good knowledge about this. So we try to use this. You're right. There is always a margin of something that we don't know. It's the same because when I talk about the orbiting or space debris, these are really very sensitive topic because we talk about collision, we talk about harm, let's say, we talk about like it can really cause harm to nations, to people, to technology. It can cause a big loss of money. So that's why I always say, and here maybe I can say something in the middle where there should be like a kind of dynamism or synergy between the design of the space law or the policy and the engineers, all the technical capabilities, and they should grow together. So we cannot stop one and make the other. We should make them in parallel, and we should define the conventions and treaties in parallel with the movement of the space technical capabilities. And again, so if you would like really, so a satellite or a spacecraft is at the end a robot in outer space. So there should be certain technical requirements that must be covered. Either a satellite or just a mission, for example, the orbiting satellite or something that's something I studied. So that's something, but let me tell you, so what I studied, it's completely a little bit different from what I'm practicing now, because every day we have something new. Every day we have a certain level of, we reach a certain level of maturities. So I worked so far on 7 satellites. So the first satellite are designed. Of course, I follow the requirements defined by ESA, that's for sure. But the first time I designed the first OBC onboard computer is not like the last one, because I started understanding what are the problems, how the data can be lost, what can cause a wrong communication between the downlink of the satellite and the ground station. And what are also, I really liked what she mentioned, the security, it's not only on satellites, also on ground station. That's something we lack. You know that ISS has been hacked. So all the entities can be hacked. And we all now know that this should be advanced, and the definition of the space law now should be different from 7 years ago or 10 years ago, thanks to these new technical capabilities. But again, I agree with you. So we should really go through it. There is always something we don't know. That's what's the exciting thing for space. So we can go through it, define the law. Of course, there should be very good space lawyers. I think we have some here. So in order for them to follow up and to be up to date with the recent technical capabilities in space.
Well, thank you. I now should have the impossible task to resume what has been discussed during these 1.5 days. The only thing I can say is that I did not expect it. I participated in many events, in many conferences, lectures, but I think this was quite unique in terms of how frank the discussion was taken, how deeply we went into the subject, what kind of perspectives we have after this event, which opens doors. It's not just an event by itself, but it opens doors. And I am really, I consider myself privileged to have been here in this role. And I thank all of the speakers, the ones who were panelists at the podium, and the ones who were in the public, who did react and did ask the right questions, which may have not yet the answers, but the first thing to underline is that we need good questions in order to make progress. And today and yesterday, we started putting good questions, which will be answered in the future. And having said that, I leave the floor to our host, who will give us the final remarks.
Thank you. I'll take the floor for a few minutes to a little bit bring you some of my conclusions from an ACT perspective. First, I have to say thank you very much for instructing me on space domain. That's how we call it in the military. And there is a lot to learn about. It's infinite knowledge and infinite development. Makes me remember some of the discussions we had within NATO when I had a previous job in Aircom Ramstein on the implication of UAVs or drones. It was the same discussions. We didn't know how to handle that. You know, the question was, you know, if a drone crosses your territorial limits, is this an invasion or not? Because there is nobody in it. So there is no military. It's just equipment, right? And then we see after 20 years, we still struggle with drones because the applications of drones are infinite, which is at the beginning it. You know, when we speak swarms of drones, when we see the economic, the industrial applications of drone that could be used for military purpose, that scares us. I mean, we still don't know how to handle that legally, militarily. How do we defend against it, and how do we, as military, use it ourselves as a possible, additional instrument or additional tool into our military equipment, procedures, and you name it. And that was just the beginning of it. It's not EDT was not even mentioned. I mean, it was just one thing. And then came cyber. We're still struggling with it. I mean, we don't even have to mention it. AI is really the next big thing that actually NATO officially starts, developing a strategy for. It was approved a week ago by the ministers, and still, even if we have a strategy, the strategy doesn't tell us what to do. So now we speak space. Space and cyber, by the way, were declared as official domains in NATO. A domain means we are going to start working on it, but the capabilities we have, except for some nations, although we don't know how to integrate it yet within the 30 allies, is just, it's baby steps. We have not even 10% of the capabilities that we should have to start even understanding. When we speak about now it's about time that we start understanding it. We aren't there yet. Okay, and then if you add a layer of autonomous, you add, and then I heard it today, the quantum technologies in the application of all of them, you see where we're going. So we're not going to run out of business for the next 20, 30 years. That's for sure. That's a good sign, right? I'm going to lose my job here. And okay, just be on a NATO perspective. Yes, we are aware, and we have defined big. We have defined that as a new, opportunity and risk area where we need to spend some energy. And in NATO structure, NATO HQ, they have defined specific directors and directorates working on these kind of technologies and what it would mean for us. I'd like to make another link to everything that is arms control related. We are very much aware in NATO that we have to look at arms race in a bigger perspective than just nuclear, if I may say so. That we may have solved some part of the non-proliferation of chemical weapons, but still we are struggling with other types of WMD, weapon of mass destruction. And we are aware in NATO that EDT, so technologies, new technologies, disruptive mainly like cyberspace, AI, can or should also be considered as a potential risk for arms race. And I was very glad to hear it around the table that what about arms race? Is it just something that we're going to spend more money or not? No. Arms race means that there is a risk related to that, because then capabilities can increase, and then there is a risk of miscalculation, problem of attrition, I heard it. So, and therefore start reacting versus another one. The principle in defense is that when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So, I mean, that's the risk of arms race. It's leading to potential consequences for all of us. And today I really learned about those consequences. They are not only military. I mean, because then if you think military, oh, what's wrong having a space war? Doesn't impact us. And I heard it today, the aspect of what's up for us on the earth, what will fall on us. That does not matter anymore, because space is now and will become more and more directly linked to our economy as well, our wealth, or potential economic growth, potential development of emerging nations, if I may say so, potential new regional grouping where nations and regions discover new opportunities to develop and have even a leading role in some of the global economic activities. I mean, this is because we are in charge in NATO for security for the 30 allies, trying to expand that further with our partners. But in fact, security is not an achievement. The security is to create an environment for a prosperous world. Obviously, you know, if only security doesn't mean anything. So I think we have so much to do, so much to integrate your knowledge. And then I will conclude, if I may, what does that mean for the hub? Okay, you have just raised the level of expectation to a level that I can read in their eyes. They are wondering how we're going to do this because they have no experts. Okay, they are hub. They create bridges. They make us gather into these events. Up to us to bring, you know, the experts that we think might learn from it as well on our side of the understanding, create networks and so on. So that will be and remain the role of the hub for the future, making sure that they liaise this kind of groups, workshops, or individual points of contacts to the relevant NATO authorities or to the relevant NATO expert who could potentially use this network to enhance, you know, awareness on both sides. And the more you're aware, the easier you will make our job, because arms control and limiting with rules means zero in military perspective. If you cannot verify it and have the mechanism to make the states obey by the rules that have been established, let's not even start doing it. Because if you put rules and you cannot control that the potential actors go by those rules, you actually only create an obstacle for yourself. So then it doesn't make sense in arms controls principles. So there is so much to learn, to be aware, to understand better. But the more we go into the EDT journey, and I can say the same thing in 30 years, it's still the same thing, right? So the more we go into this journey, the more we will have to bring specialists into the discussion, because it's not just weapons, as we heard it today. So long way to go. Thank you for pushing us to improve and go on. And I'm understanding maybe next time it will be on quantum technologies. That's what I heard from today. I mean, that's probably going to be on our plates at one point or another one. So with that, so thank you very much for everybody for participating into this activity, important for ACT. Thank you again for the organization. And I know that, you know, I went a bit beyond my lines here because I spoke a little bit on behalf of the hub. But I'm sure the hub has got his own perspective, and therefore I'd like to leave the floor to the colonel next to me.
Thank you, sir. I don't know if I am being heard. Okay. Thank you for your work, sir. And now to the rest, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the director of the hub that was not able to make it here today because of other commitments, we are marking the end of this event. And I would like to express my appreciation to all of you. We have already said that, but I want to reiterate that. To our co-host, ACT, Allied Command of Transformation, for this cooperation, because it was part of our mandate and is part of our mandate. To our panelists, because you have provided us with insightful contributions during these discussions, and we appreciate really them. To the chairperson, for guiding the discussions and guiding us through this small journey. And to all the participants, because you have shared your inputs, you have shared your ideas, and they have been proven to be very rich and very enlightening in this conversation. Let me reiterate that when we started, we outlined what we were aiming to achieve with this study day. We wanted to contribute to understand the local priorities, the regional dynamics, and the shape of the development in the space capabilities in the Middle East and North African region. We wanted to exchange ideas with our neighbors on the opportunities and shared challenges that we all face in this new domain, the space, even though it's not so new, I understand. Also, taking a stock of what countries in the MENA region are doing now and how they are cooperating across the region and beyond to achieve their own national aims. And finally, we wanted to create more awareness on the field to contribute to a future or potential best safe and sustainment use of space. This were more or less our aims when we begin to design this slide day. And in all respects, I must confess, I'm pleased. I'm pleased because I think we have exceeded our initial expectations. Discussions have been very fruitful, ideas have been exchanged, networks have been established, and I think this is what we can take from now. Having learned and hear from you, and as well as from all the discussions we have had, I think, and at least for me, and it has already been said by the general, you have educated me, and I hope we have been educated each other to some extent, broadening the spectrum of space applications in the Middle East and North Africa, and also the milestones that the nations or the entrepreneurs or the stakeholders want to or need to achieve in this field. We have understood that the landscape in the MENA region on space activities, and it was reiterated here, is very diverse, and we have heard and is that a lot is happening in the way of investment, training, education, policy making, and public and private partnerships. I'm not going to reiterate any of the ideas that you have expressed because it will take a long time and it's not the time for doing so. But I would say that I'm certain that the takeaways of this study day will further deepen our thinking on this topic, as already mentioned, and inform any future work that has to be done in this field. I must reiterate that your active participation in this event is a reflection of the commitment of yourself and your entities to support decision-making, informed decision-making in the MENA region, and also towards NATO, which was also our interest, so that we can find ways to overcome common challenges and maximize the benefit of the space development in the future. And before I conclude, yes, I would like, and this is internal to us, to take a moment to thank to my team that has been working for a long time to make this happen. And I want to appreciate that publicly. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to declare closed this Allied Command of Transformation and NSDS Hub study day on MENA space capabilities and challenges. And thank you very much for your participation to you all.